Have people kind of rolling in, but I want to try to stay on time today so that folks that might be coming to one particular session, kind of arrive when we're going to start. So I'm going to get started with just a few thoughts here. So thank you. Thank you for joining us for what is our third annual virtual conference. We started this in 2021, kind of after the pandemic, as a way for us to connect with our faculty in a different way. The Office of E-Learning at West Liberty University, we kind of have three main jobs here at our institution. One of them is we provide instructional design services to our faculty, primarily for online courses, but we also can help faculty with face-to-face courses if they wanted us to. We do technical support, so we manage the college's learning management system and a number of the ed tech tools here at the institution. So we have a help ticketing system, and we provide support to faculty, staff, and students through that. Probably about 360 days a year. There are a few days like Christmas and New Year's Day that we try to not watch tickets, but I'm sure most of us probably look at our phone to see if anything happened that we need to deal with. And we do professional development work with our faculty. And what we found was that a lot of the professional development work that we do during the year tends to be what our faculty need right now. You know, they need to know how to do something with assignments, or they need to know how to, do something in the grade book. Usually there's Sakai related trainings that we end up doing throughout the year. So what we wanted to do was, like I said, find a way to connect with them differently on different topics, kind of those topics that, maybe would inform their practice, have them do things a little differently, make them think about aspects of online learning or educational technology a little differently. So that was, like I said, kind of how the conference was born. So for this year's program, we kind of looked at what do we get questions about, and what are some hot topic things going on in online learning, and what are some ways that we can help our faculty prepare better in order to deliver courses and content to their students. So that was kind of the frame of mind that we had when we put together today's program, and I hope that you enjoy the sessions that we have planned. We're going to kick off today's session with an introduction from our provost, Dr. Mark Schulman, and he is our interim provost. We have some transition going on at the university, but he has some, I think, great insights into distance education that I know he will share with you this morning. So, Mark, it's all yours.
Thank you, Marilee. Welcome, everybody. I see we have over 24 people, and I don't see all of you, but I see some of you. And I would like to just start for a few brief minutes, following up on Marilee's introduction. I have been involved with distance learning. That's one of the things we might try to figure out someday, what to call it: distance learning, distance education, e-learning, all of the ways in which we describe it. But I have been involved for over 3 decades, I realized. More than some of you, looking at your faces, were alive. So it's been quite a while. And I don't know if you realize that there were the pioneers back then. And I just wanted to mention 2 anecdotes because they're pretty interesting about the development. And I'll quickly segue into some other comments about the future. So I started with a full-fledged approach to distance learning at the New School for Social Research in New York City. I was the chairman of the Media Studies Department. We had a fully online program, which was directed by Dr. Paul Levinson. Some of you may recognize his name because he went on to do a lot of writing on technology and is at Fordham now. he ran our MA in Media Studies completely online. And this was, remember, 30 years ago. And it was when everything was done literally on, you remember those screens with green, dark green and light green? So the entire course was done, all of the courses were done on that. I was very skeptical. I wasn't exactly a traditional academic because I had been involved in media studies, but I also thought, well, how can this be? So I wanted to evaluate it, and I called Paul in and I said, okay, you're doing our MA. I know what's going on in our MA in person, and I'm sitting in on classes and understanding what's going on. I don't really know how I can even understand and evaluate what's going on. He said, oh, that's no problem. I can give you a course. And I said, what do you mean give me a course? He said, well, just tell me which one you want and I'll give it to you. I said, okay. So the next day he brought me a stack of those, remember those old papers that were on the machines where the sprockets pulled it through, and they were 8.5 by 11. You had to tear them apart. Some of you may not even remember these things, but that's the way it was back then, with thermal printing, or thermal printing really what it was. So he brought me a course, and it was like this. And I read through it, item by item, scrolling. It was the equivalent of scrolling, but it wasn't electronic to go through the course. And I realized that what was going on was very much like what was going on in the classroom. So I became much more of an advocate after Paul convinced me by looking at his course and being able to evaluate it. I then went on, back in the day before things got more difficult for the federal government, there was something called the Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education, which has been gone a long time, but they used to give money for innovation in education. Imagine that. And one of the things that I was able to do at that time, because of a grant that we put in, was to teach the very same course, which was a very self-reflexive course because it was about the uses of technology. And I taught it on campus one semester, person to person with about 20 students, and online the next semester. So I had this comparison, and I had to write up the distinctions and the contradictions between the courses and the ways in which they were similar and dissimilar. It also became clear to me then, and remember this was 30 years ago, that there was something really going on here that should be pursued. So on and off over my career, I've started online programs. I've figured out the ways that distance education could be part of the institutions. I was president of 4 institutions and provost of 1. And the only other anecdote I want to tell you, which I find is really kind of a revealing aspect of online education. I was provost at a small college in California called Pacific Oaks College. It specialized in early childhood education. And the people who were in it were all from the local area. There were branch campuses all over California. They were older, mostly women, and they loved coming to the classes, which were held on a weekend. So it was it was not the traditional format. It was all weekend that they would be in the class. The superstar of that college was a woman named Betty James, very well known throughout the field of early childhood education. And Betty was what you would call seriously old-fashioned. She was working on a Royal typewriter, a manual typewriter back then, and that's how she did her work. So I decided we should really try to do distance education at that institution, and I decided that the best way to do that would be to have Betty direct it. You might imagine that was a hard sell to someone moving from a manual typewriter to a computer, which she'd never used. But she gamely got into it and figured it out and ditched her typewriter and got into the online program, which then became something that everybody in the institution liked very much. And we got hundreds of students literally around the world, which was what was convincing. And of course, I don't have to tell all of you this, that the fact that you could have, and this was the case at Pacific Oaks, a student in South Africa, a student in Israel, a student in Denmark, plus all over the United States in the same classroom, virtually, was really one of the primary selling points to the more or less traditional faculty. And they became very interested in it. They told me after a year when we evaluated it that it really did work well, and that things that they missed were compensated for by having so many different people from around the world in their classrooms, people who couldn't afford to come to the United States to this very specialized but very important college in its field. But they said there were 2 things they missed and that we could never duplicate them. And I said, what are those? And they said, well, hugs and potlucks, which I had to confess we weren't going to be able to ever duplicate virtually. but they were willing to give those up, at least for the online courses for the value of being everywhere at once. So everywhere at once, that's kind of the way I think about it. Marilee's work has been really quite exemplary, and what I've learned from her in the 4 months I've been here. Interestingly enough, as I was thinking about 30 years, there's some of the similar issues today. And of course, there's all new issues because of the preponderance of screens everywhere. Back then, that wasn't the case, of course. But somehow we're going to figure this out. And certainly in the case of West Liberty University, with Marilee providing leadership, with I see some of you on here like Moon of faculty who are very interested in this area, there will be brilliant and exciting and innovative solutions as we move into the next phase. It really does seem to me that while so much was done at a distance during the pandemic, it was a mixed blessing because it wasn't really distance learning, it was remote. It was remote instruction. In fact, I'll stipulate that. Now I may be saying something controversial, but so be it. I'm the provost, I'm allowed to say things like that. So the reality is that while the notion that you don't have to be in a classroom has been deeply embedded in what higher education is, I think there's some distractions that we have to get past that didn't exist 30 years ago, the ones that existed 3 years ago. But I predict that with meetings like this, which is just a wonderful way that I think West Liberty is making a contribution to the field, all of us will be able to think back on this and say, was it really that way 3 years ago, 30 years ago? Thank you, Marilee.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the leadership that you've brought to the institution and the time that you've been with us. Like I've mentioned, I always enjoy our conversations and us working together. So we are at pretty much the top of the hour. So we are going to transition into our first presentation of the day, which is by Mr. Roger Getz, who is the Dean of Elbin Library and Learning Resources here at the institution. And he is going to talk about copyright for educators. So Roger, it is all yours.
Thank you, Marilee. And the first thing I'd like to do is just thank you for the opportunity to be here and for you and your staff for putting this together. I'm thrilled to be able to start our sessions today, and I look forward to it. I'd really like to promote for anybody to ask questions. I'll try and pause every once in a while and prompt for questions. But you know, also I want to share my screen because I do have a presentation here of slides. So I'm going to do that. Oh, that's not the right one. There we go. All right, very good. Everybody can see the presentation slides okay? Just give me a thumbs up or a nod. Thank you, Kimberly, I got you. I appreciate it. A little bit more information about myself. 15 years of experience leading academic libraries as a director or a dean. This is my 5th stop on that journey, and I've previously worked in the humane system at a small town in northern Maine called Presque Isle. And my most recent position prior to coming to West Liberty was at Doane University in Crete, Nebraska. So I've moved around a little bit, but you know, very happy to be here at West Liberty, and you know, been here about almost 6 months. Time's flown by, and it's really been quite enjoyable. So let's make sense of some copyright. And you know, the first thing I want to say is just some basic information. U.S. copyright law is in the United States Code, Title 17. It's chapters 1 through 8 and 10 through 12. It is obviously, because it's in the U.S. Code, it is federal. And pretty much copyright law gives owners the exclusive rights to do certain things with their work. They can reproduce a work. They can prepare derivative works based on the original. They can distribute copies to the public. They can perform the work publicly or display the work publicly. These are rights that the owners have, and they're exclusive. We can't do these things without the express permission of whoever has the copyright to these works. So, and the other thing I want to mention is copyright is a very muddy law. And what I mean by that is law is based on precedent. Precedent is when things actually go to court and a legal decision is made. That rarely happens in copyright law. Normally what happens, especially for educators, is if an owner of the rights feels that the rights are being infringed upon, they will simply contact the institution. They will say, we don't want you to be using our product in this way. The institution simply says, we apologize, we will fix that. And so there's very little precedent especially when it comes to copyright usage for educators, because that's the normal procedure and it stops there. So there's no precedent set. There's no legal decision as to what can and cannot be done. So copyright is one of those federal laws that has very little legal determination. So it's very difficult to say this is, against the law, this isn't. So just keep that in mind as we talk about things. The other thing I will guarantee is you have heard something that is wrong about copyright. Everyone has heard a lot of different things. And to be honest with you, because there's very little precedent, it's hard to pinpoint what is proper use and what is not. So again, keep that in mind as we move forward here. Copyright law applies to nearly all creative and intellectual works. That would include books, journals, photographs, art, music, computer programs, websites, sound recordings, anything that is creative or intellectual in nature is protected by copyright. One thing that has changed fairly, within the last laws that were passed, works are protected automatically without copyright notice or registration. So it's really important to understand that, as soon as something is created and it's put onto a medium, that could be, it could be a written page, it could be a piece of artwork, it could be a photograph. It is automatically protected. It does not need to be registered with the Copyright Office. It's automatic. Somebody has ownership of that. And it's usually the person that created it, okay? Copyright protection lasts for many decades. So how has it changed? Well, for one thing, today, in the current law as it states, copyright protection lasts for the life of the author plus 70 years. So there is no set date, okay, for anything from 1978 forward. It depends on the life of the author plus 70 years. From 1924 to 1978, Anything published, like let's strictly talk about books in this instance. Anything published in those years, the protection is 95 years from the publication date. So again, that's a little more stable of understanding, but it depends on the year that it was published. Prior to 1924 is public domain. Those materials are no longer protected by copyright. All right. There are some works not protected by copyright. U.S. government publications. Anything that is provided or created by the U.S. government is not protected by copyright. Okay, it is a public institution. It is run and operated by tax dollars, so they do not feel that those publications should be protected. Anything published prior to 1924, as we just said, is public domain, meaning it is freely accessible. If your institution, basically West Liberty University, has a license for library materials, especially electronic materials, those are not protected by copyright to a degree. And we'll go over that more in depth a little later. And this is important, although this is an online education. Performance or display by instructors or students is only permitted in face-to-face teaching activities only. So if you're in class, in a classroom setting, in a live setting, you can perform or display within that classroom. Okay, and that is not protected by copyright. Now, there is something called fair use. And I want to thank, most of this information I've gotten from the University of Georgia. I like their website on copyright. So this is actually, I want to be total disclosure, this is actually going to be their fair use checklist. Let's see if I can pull it up. There we go. So if there's a question of, if you have something in front of you and you want to figure out if, okay, am I allowed to use this per fair use guidelines?
Mr. Getz, we can't see the fair use website.
Interesting.
We only still seeing at the cover page.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, then we'll pivot. My apologies. So let's pivot to this screen here, to this slide. So that checklist is basically.
Hold on, I think you're we're still on your first slide. Do you have another window open?
You should see 4 factors of fair use.
No.
No, not yet.
Oh, we haven't seen anything at all. All we see is your page, and it's not even in presentation mode.
If you minimize this presentation, it might be behind it.
Let me try something. I apologize about that. Thank you so much for letting me know.
Do you want me to present? I have a copy of your stuff. Do you want me to present while you talk?
This could be, I know this seems like forever, at least it does for me. Give me one moment here.
That button wasn't even working when you use that. There's a little button on the bottom. Not that, okay.
I'm gonna share my screen because I do have a copy of you.
Yeah, that would be great. I apologize.
So
I'm so glad you said something.
are you on the fair use checklist?
Yeah, can you see that? Or you pulled it up on your
I pulled it up on mine because I do have a copy. Is this the one that you're currently
Yes.
talking about? Chart?
Yes.
Okay. I'll try to follow what you're saying. Move the screen.
Thank you, and I really apologize. Thank you for weighing in there. Gosh, that's embarrassing. So basically, this fair use checklist is to be used, and it's used especially by faculty to determine if you can, if it's favorable to use a work or it isn't. And it just goes over the factors, the purpose and character, the purpose and character of the use of the work, the nature of copyrighted work, the amount and substantiability used, and the effect of use upon the market or value. And what I like about this PDF is it really does a nice job of simplifying things to the best of its ability. Again, copyright is it's very difficult to interpret. Again, a lot of that is due to lack of precedent. So can we go back to the slideshow? Okay, so, those are the 4 factors of fair use. Let's go into them a little more in depth. We go to the next slide. So the purpose and character of use. There are 3 things that I highlighted here. This favors nonprofit educational use. It also favors use that has been transformed, not copied, which is really important. So in other words, the key is to just not use copies of works or complete copies, especially. However, it does favor multiple copies for classroom use. So but again, if you look at them together, the multiple copies for classroom use, it's telling you in the previous one that it favors use that has been transformed in some way. So it's if you interpret something, that's better than just copying, pages or chapters from a text or something of that nature. We go to the next screen. The nature of copyrighted work. The law favors, or fair use, favors the use of excerpts of factual information, okay? And especially of educational information. However, it is unfavorable towards works of fiction, unpublished works, test forms, workbook pages, anything that is published, especially where there is a cost to them. All right. Which again, there's a lack of interpretation really or an understanding with that. A lot of test forms, things of that nature, you know, you really need to understand it may be usable in your class, but to share that beyond is really not in favor of fair use. It all depends what the guidelines are from the publisher. We go to the next slide. The amount of substantiality used. Okay, this measures both quantitatively and qualitatively. There is no exact measure of allowable quantity. It's really important to understand that. You know, many libraries will say, okay, you're allowed, you know, one chapter. If you want to copy a chapter, you're okay. And again, this is a pure example of precedent because this really doesn't have any precedent available. What exactly is allowed? Okay, it's very vague. It's very unfavorable to fair use to copy an entire work. It's just not permitted, basically. There are some types of protected works that are more problematic. A couple of those are images and motion pictures. The reason for that is it's hard to take a piece and utilize it without it being a substantial part. Like, how do you take a piece of an image that you want to utilize without, you know, using this substantiality clause? Motion pictures are the same way. You might be able to use a clip, but again, the next and last issue with substantiality is it is unfavorable to use the heart of the work. That's not really been identified exactly what that means. In theory, it means the essence of the work. What is the work really about? Well, that's kind of difficult to interpret. Even as a librarian, you know, it's hard for me to look at a book that I've read many times in my life and say, okay, these pages are the heart of the work. You know, it's a very vague and confusing, I guess, phrase, but that's what we have to work with. So, and the next slide, this one's a little bit easier to understand. If you're looking at a paper copy of something, if there is a digital license that is available to use a digital portion, okay, it is unfavorable to copy part of that work. All right, so what they're saying is we have it covered that you have access. All right, you can pay for the digital license or you can purchase the item and you have access. So we have it covered. You can take your pick. Any commercial use or impact on market or value is unfavorable. For me, I've gotten into many discussions over the last 15 years in higher education with some of my colleagues. They might have a collection of textbooks for use. You know, if you are using an item to limit the purchase or the sales of that item, you're diminishing the value to the copyright owner. And so in essence of the law, that's not legal. If your sole purpose is to limit the sales of that item. So if we would have a policy here in Elvin Library that we would purchase books. And the reason we're doing that is, you know, we're purchasing one copy so 50 students can come here and utilize it. And that's the only reason we're doing it. It would be hard to justify that in copyright law. Because we were basically saying we are purchasing one to keep 50 others from having to purchase it. So the commercial value is diminished for the copyright holder. However, if a publisher gives a desk copy for a reserve item, that's totally different. They are the copyright holder. So if the publisher offers a free copy for that purpose, that's totally acceptable. All right, so you can see how it works. You know, they're basically releasing that right. So we can go on to the next screen. So at this point, does anyone have any questions? It's very vague. Copyright law, like I said, is very muddy and very vague. But I'll try and answer any questions you would have. Kimberly?
Yes.
Maybe
Yeah.
this is something that you're going to talk about, but you know, I think most of us have been told in different ways and to different extents some of this information about you know, copyrighted material not being able to be used in classes, and we should try to avoid doing that and whatnot. But I think the question comes down to, like, is there a way to, I don't want to say get around this, but is there a way to still use some sources in classrooms? What would be your suggestions and strategies for doing that? Because a lot of times we just come up to the point where we're like, our students have to read this thing. And, you know, I'm not going to require them to spend $60 on some book because they need to read a chapter and, you know, use maybe a workbook page or something like that. You know, what are your suggestions for that? Or again, maybe you're going to get to that.
Well, I'll tell you, I love that question because I just went through all that dry copyright dribble. And now we're going to talk about exactly what you asked me. All right. So I appreciate that question. And I want everyone to know Kimberly and I did not arrange that prior to the session this morning. But, you know, that was perfect. But before I address that, you know, Kimberly, are there any other questions? And I will address that in detail.
I have one question.
Yes.
Say I have one book as the textbook required for the class. So when I prepare slides for a specific, for example, terminology, can I have that sentence defined in the textbook, copied to the slide?
Yes. And again, it goes to the usage and the limitations of the usage. If you're utilizing that for your classes,
Yes.
that you're instructing, also you're transforming it. You're taking a small piece and you're utilizing that in your classes. You're not copying like an entire chapter, you know, and keeping that openly available for your students. That's the difference. So if you're transforming it, that's where that comes in. You know, at this point, and most publishers, you know, they will have instructional materials as part of the package for the book. Any of those you can utilize freely. And I understand you said you were creating this, but, you know, as long as you're not, you know, like, you know, copy to copy and keeping it openly available for your students, and, you know, but what you're giving them, you know, on a slide, that could be available for the class. Okay. All right. But again, a lot of this also goes to, it cannot be on the open website, you know, on an open website where people could access it at any time. If it is utilized, especially with online education, if it's utilized for the length of the class, and then that material is no longer available online until the next section that you would have, you're okay.
Okay, so I got it. So I could use refer to the materials from the textbook, including those, for example, there are, say, rule 1, rule 2, rule 3, like that. Then I can put all of these pieces to my slides. And, but because they are part of the chapter, for example, they are fine then for me to create the slides.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
one more, okay, great. So how about images or pictures from the textbook? Let's say I need to use one chart from the textbook. Should I create the chart by myself, or I can use a screenshot of the textbook to be used on in the slides, or no?
Again, you could use the screenshot from the textbook as long as it's utilized in the class that is utilizing that textbook, and your purpose is not to keep your students from purchasing that textbook. It's a very, if you're creating informational pieces from that textbook to augment the educational process, you should be okay.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Excellent question.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay. Very good. Well, if you have questions, don't be afraid to try and grab my attention. But we're going to get started with Kimberly's outstanding question that she had. I have to be frank, I'm a little more excited about this half of the presentation than I was about the first half. I'm not a lawyer. I don't, I'm not like excited about, US code, but it's very important for our, for how we operate as a university. The last thing that we would want to do is break copyright law, being an academic institution. So while it's not very exciting, it is very important that we understand it to the best of the abilities that we can. But as I say, and I will continue to say, without precedent, laws are clearly not established. And so, when it comes to educational institutions, there's just very little precedent with copyright law. We could go to, so here we go. What can be used? Well, there's resources called Open Education Resources, or OER, and that's what we're mostly going to talk about here in the second half of the presentation. We could go to the next slide. So I have a couple definitions here. This is from Education Week, and I do have my references at the end of the presentation. But materials for teaching or learning that are either in the public domain or have been released under a license that allows them to be freely used, changed, or shared with others. Okay, and I have one more definition. We could go to the next page. Whoop. Well, my apologies for that. It looks fine on my screen. This is from UNESCO. Open education resources are learning, teaching, and research materials in any form and medium that reside in the public domain or under copyright that have been released under an open license that permit no cost access, reuse, repurpose, adaptation, and redistribution by others. Okay. I used to include all library resources, but we pay for those resources for that license. So in essence, a lot of library resources are no longer considered open education resources, but for our use, if you're from a different university or educational setting, it would be the same. You could utilize library resources. So we're going to talk about that. But let's start with open textbooks. If we go to the next slide, I have two sites here. And if we could open OpenStax. This is absolutely my favorite open education resource website, but it's limited. Okay, but I'll explain why I like it. So this is the main page. If we go to subjects at the top, drop down, and then all, it'll give us an idea of what we're looking at, and we can just slowly scroll through these. These are the textbooks that are available with OpenStax. OpenStax was developed by Rice University, Houston, Texas. And the thing that I really like about their offerings with open textbooks is that they're very well done. Okay, they're vetted. They go through a vetting process. You know, they really do a fantastic job. These are totally accessible. As a matter of fact, I have used the College Success textbook in the past. We also use the College Success textbook for our College 101 course here on our West Liberty campus. So these are really excellent materials. Almost all of them come with teaching materials or instruction materials. So, you know, we won't be able to get in unless you have unless you register. Registration is free. Okay, it takes about 1 day or 2 days to be registered, but you can, it has course packs, it has a manual, it has, you know, PowerPoint slides, test banks, all this is freely accessible. Okay, it's really an outstanding resource. And in this instance, it's truly open education resources. You can use a chapter, you can use the whole thing. You can pick and choose anything, you can pull things out. It is one of the best open education options that is out there, okay? You do not need to download the book. So you don't, you know, like fill up your space on your computer, your storage space. I can't say enough about this. The issue is it is limited to the materials that they have available. Now they're adding a lot, but it's really a lot of materials for the first 2 years of general education. It's a lot of introductory textbooks, okay? But they are expanding their offerings. So I love this site. I know many professors that utilize materials from this site, and they're very happy about it. They have a lot of textbooks that are very expensive to purchase, that are totally free and accessible. Very easy to use, okay? Students do not need to register. So at least the last time I used the site, but you need to register for the instructional materials. All right, if that makes sense. Highly recommend taking a look at this. Again, OpenStax with an X. Yep, thank you, Corey. So if we go back to the slide, we can take a look real quick at the Open Textbook Library. All right, again, a little different setting. If I'm not mistaken, this is Oregon State University that opened on but you know, here they have subjects a little bit less user-friendly, less recognizable, but you know, you can browse subjects. And one thing that you'll notice is it's basically they've created some of the work, but they've also collected some items from other open education resources. All right, so you'll find things from OpenStax in this collection. And again, it's open education resources, so you can do that. It's freely available. All right. So another good option. So if you're looking to augment your class or looking for a textbook, and there are many sites out there that are available. There are some subscription sites. Now, by the essence of the definition of open education resources, those aren't open education resources. They market themselves as such. But if you got to pay for the materials, they're really not open education resources. So just keep that in mind. But again, the two sites that we looked at, totally accessible. All right. Any questions about those? We go to the next slide. So again, technically not open education resources because we do pay for a couple of these things, but you can utilize them to create classes and for sources in your online classes. So that's why they're here. Licensed library resources. Open Library has licensed databases. Okay, we're also adding more databases and materials. We're adding ebooks for this upcoming fall semester. All right. So we will have ebooks available, more ebooks than we have. We have e-journals through databases like Academic Search Complete with EBSCO. The other interesting thing that has happened in the last 5 years that does have some precedent because the publishers have fought it and lost so far is controlled digital lending. And we'll get into that. If we could go to the next slide. It is very important that access to ebooks is unlimited simultaneous users. There are some ebook sites that are like libraries that one person checks out the item, the ebook, and they're the only one that has access to it for a defined period of time. That's difficult to utilize that resource for instructional purposes, okay? However, if the license to ebooks is unlimited simultaneous users, every person on, whether that's a West Liberty faculty member or student, could be looking at the same book at the same time on the same page and reading the same excerpt. And it's totally legal. So you could put a link to that book, or you could simply give instructions how to access that book. All right. The other thing that's important to understand is just because you have complete access to utilize those materials, that does not mean, and we gotta be careful about copyright and copyright. You cannot create copies of an ebook, okay? Whether it's digitally or electronically. That is not permitted, or that's the same. Digitally or on paper, that's not the same, okay? Access does not mean the ability to fully copy and utilize those materials. However, you can assign chapters of ebooks. You can, assign excerpts, a couple pages. A lot of times there are sub-chapters. So these resources should go live for us sometime in July. If you want to see what's available, I am hoping we will be adding about 300,000 unique ebook titles to our collection. So you're going to have a lot more options to find materials to utilize in your classes. The next one, please. Again, e-journals or articles from those journals. Access does not mean full copyright. Now, you can As long as you're using these materials for educational purposes in the classes you're teaching or as a student, you know, at West Liberty University, you're fine. Okay. You can print a copy, things of that nature of articles. I don't think there's really a reason to print a digital copy of an article, but you can do that. But there are exceptions to the standards, okay? For instance, there are any business instructors that are on this session. Harvard Business Review does not allow links to their articles in classes of any kind, whether it's online, in person. They do not permit links to any of their articles. That is not part, they're an exception to the business database that we have that has Harvard Business Review. Why they are like that, I can't answer that.
I can.
But that is, what's that?
I said I can tell you.
Go ahead, Ann.
Because if you have to, if what they want you to do is buy their articles, buy the subscription, buy their case studies, and I say, sadly, it's a great business model if you're a librarian.
No, absolutely. You're 100% correct. And they also have a student rate. So what they want is they actually want you to charge your students for a subscription.
Yeah.
And that's why I say I don't understand the ethics behind it. I understand the economic benefits,
Right.
But the ethics I think are a little shaky.
I couldn't agree.
But yes, thank you for your input, Ann. I enjoyed that.
You're welcome.
And if we can go to the next slide. Controlled digital lending might be a new term for some of you. It is, and this does have precedent because the publishers have been fighting this tooth and nail. This is a new concept for libraries, and especially academic libraries are the ones that utilize it. What it is if we have a physical copy of a title on our shelf, precedent is set that we could scan that copy and loan it out in digital format to a customer or to a West Liberty student, faculty, or staff member. However, we must then take the paper copy, put it in a back room on a shelf, and not make it available. So in other words, if you own one copy of a physical copy, you can only loan one copy at a time, whether it's the digital copy or the paper copy. Okay. So, but it has passed several lawsuits and it has won. So controlled digital lending might be something new that is actually happening when it comes to paper books. But you need to have guidelines and you need to have the programming that people cannot print any part of it while they have it, and it is for a limited checkout time. Okay, so it has to be very tightly restricted if you send an electronic copy. We go to the next page. So are there any questions? Here's my references, by the way. Are there any questions about any of that information that we just covered about what can be used? Was that helpful, Kimberly?
It was kind of helpful. I think I have a slightly different question though. I have certain sources, for example, like an original work in sociology. Like for example, I just taught a sociological theory course and they're reading original work from theorists who were writing in the 1950s and 60s. Because we covered like 12 different theorists in the semester, I didn't feel like it was appropriate for me to assign, let's say, 24 books that they have to buy because they needed to read maybe a chapter from each one of those books. I did have them purchase certain books that included excerpts so that I avoided copyright issues and whatnot. But there were some places where they still needed to read some of that original work. And like I said, I did the best I could with finding maybe which copies of books were really inexpensive, and I could ask them to purchase those. But if they're just reading maybe like 10 to 12 pages of something, it's just hard for me to justify them spending even like $10 on a book because it's so limited. So in those kinds of circumstances, I'm wondering a way to work around that. Although I guess you did kind of touch on that very vague issue, right? It's not your fault that it's vague, but that issue of, if it's not quantitatively excessive, then maybe it's okay. But also, if this was sort of the heart of the work, it was the 12 pages or so that really set up the theory, then like, what do I do there? How can I kind of protect myself?
Okay, accepted practice. Okay, now we're not talking fair use, and we're not talking, like copyright law. It's a different concept. What is accepted, accepted practice? Okay, accepted practice today is that you can use like up to a chapter. Some libraries say 1/10 of the content of the book you can copy. The whole key is that if you realize, if that publisher comes and says you're not permitted to do that, we just need to be prepared to say, my apologies, I'll take down, I'll stop, it won't happen again. It won't go any further than that. Now, in the 15 years that I've been a dean or director, that's never happened. Okay. It doesn't mean we want to freely test the law, but accepted practice is that you can use a limited amount of, a book. And so even though that in itself is a vague answer, it is an accepted practice to do that. The exact amount is what's really vague. There is
I appreciate you articulating that. And I have heard different things depending on what school I'm at. And I've taught at like 6 different schools. So it's always confusing. But yeah, I mean, it's and maybe it's a little bit more understandable when it's something like classical books, things that maybe aren't in print and haven't been in print for a long time and things of that nature. And again, using a very small excerpt. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that is accepted practice. It's not fair use. And that's where the confusion comes in a lot. It could be fair use, but, again, fair use hasn't been totally, set in stone as to what it is. So I will go with the accepted practice rule on that. And for that reason, we don't monitor our copiers. We expect faculty, to use it in discretion and to understand that there are laws that protect copyrighted works. But, as long as we understand that, we try to have an acceptable practice that will not, throw up red flags.
Roger, I can tell you that we did have an incident here at West Liberty. Now, it was before my time. We received basically a cease and desist letter from a company that we were linking out to materials. And we received a letter saying, stop it, take the link out. So we have had at least we have had an incident of that.
Yeah. And that's, I understand that. And like I said, that's a perfect instance of like, even with our business database, if we linked Harvard Business Review articles, that would not be permitted. However, anything else in that same business database, I think that's the only exception in the whole, I think that's the only exception I know of a journal that you cannot do that we own a license to utilize. And that's why I say ethically, I think it's a little shady. Any other quick questions? And the only other thing that I'd like to say is The library staff will be happy to assist you in finding materials. So especially when we get our ebooks and things like that set up, please feel free to contact us, come in and see us. We're happy to assist. You know, any of you with finding resources, you're the subject experts, but we're here to serve. And in any way we can do that, we're happy to do that. So I've helped a lot of professors find, you know, open textbooks, ebooks, you know, articles, and, you know, we do that. So if there's anything we can do to assist you, we're happy to do so. And especially with that, we are getting new materials coming in this summer. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you. I really apologize for not sharing the proper screen. Still don't know how I couldn't, but that's kind of weird. But, you know, I hope the session ended better than it started. And, you know, it's been a real pleasure. I appreciate the invitation. And please contact us with any questions or if we can help.
Thank you very much, Roger. We appreciate your time and your knowledge today. And we all have those technical glitches, trust me. I've been there, so no problem whatsoever. We have right now about 5 minutes until our next session is going to start, which is on artificial intelligence in the classroom. So if you want to get a cup of coffee, go to the bathroom, now is an opportunity to do that, and we'll start in a few minutes.